Hi, welcome. I'm Franny Miller. Michelle, should I introduce myself first?
Yep.
Yeah, here's just an overview before we get started of the workshop plan. First, we're going to introduce ourselves, hear from you all too. We're going to look at an example video project. We're going to hear from our coworker, Martha, who's a guest today to tell us about her experience with video making. Then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to get into talking about how to plan your project. So that's sort of the planning stage of your project and also the brainstorming stage of the project. All right, so let's get started. My name is Franny Miller. I use she and her pronouns, and I am a ELS at Skokie Public Library. That stands for Experiential Learning Specialist. I work in the Boombox, which is a children's science and art learning space. And also I am supposed to work upstairs in the studio when it opens, which is our upstairs maker space, which focuses on digital media and art and making. I have experience making podcasts and videos. My background is more in visual art, but I really love getting to work in audio. Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, so my name is Michelle Koo. My pronouns are she and her. In terms of what I do at the library, it's exactly the same as Franny. I'm also an experiential learning specialist working in both the studio and the boombox. For my access needs, I'm vaguely hearing impaired in both ears, so sometimes I might not be able to hear everything that you might say. So I might ask you to repeat what you've said in the chat, and that would really help me communicate better with you. What brings me here today is sharing my experience with making videos and podcasts. I don't come from a creative background, but I have had experience in making both of these things in a corporate environment, in sharing different teams, the innovations of different teams with my broader organization. And so what I'd love for you to do is to introduce yourselves with these same questions in the chat, especially to tell us what brings you here today, because that's going to really help us tailor this workshop to help suit your needs and what you want to learn from us today. And while you do that, I'll pass it over to Martha.
Hi, I'm so glad to see you. We're a great turnout and to be with Michelle and Franny. I'm an information specialist, which means I work about 10 feet away from these other ladies. I'm a she, her, and I work at the second floor at the help desk. So if you have any questions about using the computer commons, that's where I am, and I'm available for any help that you might need. If you come visit me in the library. And I just started making movies out as a hobby, and it's become a very useful skill to have to share my ideas during the pandemic. So I kind of ramped things up, but I'm looking forward to learning about what you people are interested in doing. That's all.
Thanks, Martha. And just in case, if anyone needs to know, you can access the chat by hovering your mouse down at the very bottom of the screen, and next to, or somewhere in the middle, there should be an icon that says chat. If you click on that, that will bring up the chat box where you can read other people's messages. I've just posted a message asking you to introduce yourselves in the chat, and you should also be able to type your message in there to introduce yourself. And it's good to hear that you're interested in the creative and technical process of creating podcasts, Christine. So some of the slides today are going to be focused on videos, but what I can do is add some comments in the chat to talk about how the tips and tricks that we'll talk about can be adapted for podcasts.
So here we have a poll, which Lina, who's helping us today, is going to bring up. And that is just so that we can get a good idea of your background and your comfort level with technology. And that will just help us know how to cater the workshop to you all, so you all can get the most out of it.
Okay, so this is really interesting, the results. All of you are comfortable using the cell phone. Not as many of you are comfortable using the computer, but there's a reasonable level of comfort there. And editing software is tricky, which is definitely a hurdle that we've all have to overcome. But it's something that we can do together. And then in terms of comfort levels with learning new technologies, half of you are very comfortable, 33% nervous, but you can manage, and 17% not very comfortable at all. So what we can try to do is we'll pitch what we're doing at sort of the mid-level of nervous, but you can manage. And if you feel like you're not very comfortable with learning new technology, please write down all of the questions that you have and all of the things that you're nervous about. And next week, we're going to have an open hour session where we'll have 1.5 hours set aside for you to come and ask us any question that you need. Or if you want more personalized help, we can help you with that personally, step by step, one-on-one with you. We also have one-on-one options, which we can talk about at the very end of the session, where even if it's next year and the workshop is over, you can still contact the library for one-on-one support in learning how to use the technology that you're struggling with. And what this also tells us is that because you are mostly comfortable with using your cell phone, we will spend a bit more time talking about how you can use your cell phone to both record podcasts, record videos, and also edit podcasts and videos. And if you would like us to spend more time on alternate technologies, such as separate microphones or separate editing software on the computer, you can let us know, and we can also walk through those next week at the office hours session as well.
All right, great. We are going to move on now into showing our example video, which is a project that Michelle made for the Boombox Online, which is our youth learning space. Here, I'm going to pass over to Michelle so that she can introduce her project.
So this was a short video that I created at children with the intention of teaching science through a fun project. And the reason why we're showing you this video is because I used a number of different techniques in the creation of this video, and it's going to be a example that we can refer to continuously throughout the next couple of weeks.
Where is the boombox going to be today? Hi everyone! I have some rock candy with me here. They're a really fun snack. So today we're going to be learning about how to make them, and we're going to learn about rocks along the way. For this project, you will need the activity sheet, which you can find on the Skokie Library website, sugar, some waterproof and heat-proof containers, so I'm using glasses, but you can also use jars or mugs, and some sticks. So I have chopsticks here, but you can also use skewers. You will also be using hot water, so you might need to ask an adult for help. First, let's dissolve the sugar into water to make a sugar solution. I'm going to mix together 3 cups of sugar. You can see that the sugar goes up to the 3-cup line with just 1 cup of water. That is a lot of sugar and not very much water. Do you think I can get all of the sugar to dissolve into the water? Well, let's find out. You can see how thick and cloudy this mixture is. The sugar has not dissolved at all. You might be able to hear the grinding sound of the sugar crystals as well. So what can we do? Well, we can heat it up. I'm going to do this in the microwave, but you can also ask an adult to help you bring this to a boil on the stove instead. What we are doing here is making a super saturated solution. If I use cold water, I can only get a little bit of the sugar to dissolve. When we use boiling water, the heat allows more sugar to dissolve than normal. But supersaturated solutions are unstable. This means that all of the extra sugar in the cup does not want to stay dissolved. What does that mean? Let's find out. Okay, so the sugar has dissolved now, and we can tell because the solution has stopped being cloudy and it's now clear. If I stick a thermometer in, it tells me that the solution is above 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which means that it's above boiling point. That also means that it's really hot, so we're going to have to let it cool down for 10 minutes before we start handling it. While we wait for the solution to cool down and become safe to touch, let's look for some rocks around the house.
All right, so that was about the first 3 minutes of the video. And in the end, I want to see if I can show a picture of the rock candy Michelle made, just so that you can see the close-up. Oh yeah, here it is. Just so that I'm gonna go back to the slides. Okay, great. Thank you all for watching that, and thanks Michelle for letting us use your video as an example. We're going to be referring to this sometimes to sort of break down the techniques that Michelle used when she was recording the video and audio. So next, we're going to introduce our guest, Martha, who is our coworker, and she's here to give her perspective and experiences.
Thank you, Franny. Let me get my my notes here. Yeah, if you want to, did you want to play that, or did you want to towards the end, or?
I can play it. Would you like the video to precede you a little?
Just for 40 seconds or so.
All right, so now I'm going to play a video made by Martha, Backyard Birding in the Spring in the Midwest.
At the end of March, I woke up to this noise. To me, this signals the true beginning of spring. Every year, a pair of ducks, sometimes more, come and visit my yard. They wake up, they walk around the backyard and do yoga. They visit my neighbors, they sit on my roof. Once, they led a parade of mourning doves, squirrels, and robins. Suddenly they left. I figured they found a better place to nest other than a yard where two big dogs play fetch. I won't see them again hanging out, but I do find signs they've been around.
Thanks. Yeah, that was my first birding film, so it's sort of, things have changed a little better. Every time you do something, it gets a little better. And let's see, can you see me, or? Okay. So I don't know, I was asked to share my story, and I'll give it to you in a nutshell. I started to do a lot of photography starting in high school. I took a class in school, and I learned how to do darkroom things, and I sort of learned the basics of like how to frame a shot, how to, you know, add context to a shot, how to make it meaningful. And I took some classes in college and learning about the great photographers. And that kind of worked over, kind of helps doing videos. You know, you want to make your shots interesting, you want to have good lighting and all that. I became my kids' school's PTA archivist. Ooh. And it was an amazing experience. It was like just putting myself out there as a legitimate photographer. It was just taking pictures, just tons of pictures relating to you know, helping classmates and family members. And it was my first experience, what I'm going to call pre-shooting, which is what I call, it's like the stuff that you do before you actually take the pictures. And it's before going to an event, I think about what I want the finished product to look like, and how, and in this case for the PTA, it would be on a memory book, you know, one of those photo albums. But the same logic is applied to when I make a movie. You know, you want to show teamwork for field day and such. And then the teachers asked me to create end of year slideshows. So what I did was I chose iMovie because it worked really well with iPhotos. I had all my photos in iPhotos. And I was able to just make a nice slideshow, and it was put some music in it, and it was pleasing. I mean, for the time, that was what people were interested in. And happily, the current version of iMovie, it's possible to do what took me a few hours to do in about 10 minutes. It's the software itself is really improved. You just take a collection of JPEGs and plop them in the app and add a soundtrack, and you're good to go. When I make a movie, I try to think about tone and what's like the overall mood, like beauty or calm, supportive or quirky. And I try to use sound and lighting to solidify the tone that I'm going for. I try to show and not tell. I want to teach something practical, the obvious get, and it's usually explicit, and I focus on details. And then the third part is a little harder, and I'm going to call it implicit or meta. And a film buff will probably has a much better term for this, but it's like the deeper meaning that you're kind of go for. And some people will get it and some people won't, but it's usually like how you're going to apply it to your life. Stick with me for a second on this. I'll give you some examples. That, for example, I first started out making movies on a regular basis for Eagle projects. I'm really attached to a Boy Scout troop locally, and so then the pre-logic that I would use for the Boy Scout movies would I be like, okay, I want it to be a souvenir for the Scouts family of this kid's hard work, and to use it as a recruiting tool for incoming boys' parents. And the tone is organized in leadership. I show the Scout, I let the Scout describe his own project and why it's important. And then I'd shoot all the videos, you know, like the B-rolls of the people working and such. And then the implicit thing that I show is, it's usually in the editing. I employ that Boy Scouts can grow goofy middle schoolers into young adults who care about their community and want to be responsible. So that's kind of the things that I think about. In the bird videos, the pre-logic for this was like just sort of at first I did you shoot a lot and then form the story, which is kind of weird. It's a different way of thinking about making a movie. The tone, I wanted it to be calm and sort of zen. I show the differences in similar birds, birding ID methodology. And the implicit thing, this is the weird one, is I'm showing you that if you pay attention to the natural world around you, you'll see changes. And some are small and some are the results of climate change. And so I found that if I want to encourage new birders to explore more, I don't bash them over the head with it's all doom because they will quit. So I want to make it a very positive, calm experience. And then maybe they can use that information to build on something in their own life. And then my journey part, this is the other weird thing. So after my first video, this video I did that you just saw was edited in iMovie. And I felt that I was sort of at the limit of what iMovie could do, and I wanted to sort of expand. It was also the beginning of the pandemic. And I thought, well, what the heck? So I got a copy of DaVinci Resolve, which we'll talk about later on. And the library also has some great applications, which Franny and Michelle can tell you about. And I just thought, let's just try it. And it was really just like making spaghetti, you know, to see what sticks, you know, that kind of a thing. My advice for you all, and I hope, you know, if you're doing podcasts, if you're doing video editing, is to bring batteries and chargers. It's a very functional thing. You just never want to run out of power. Get the pre-logic for your story up front. You know, like make sure you know what your audience is. If you're going to show it on Instagram, if you're going to put it on YouTube, you can give you different ideas. And then the last one is to be calm. and this is where I'm going to be very embarrassing to myself. And if I'm calm and I look like I know what I'm doing, the subjects that I'm filming, except for birds, will open up to me. And I really do this. Sometimes I get a lot of noise in my head, and I think about that song from Sesame Street, which is, "Don't worry if it's not good enough for anyone else to see. Just make a movie." And then la 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 la. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha. I really appreciated the singing. Oh, it's playing again. Sorry about that. Oh, so we are going to have a little time for questions, as long as we need, really. And afterwards, we're going to go to our break, since this is an hour-and-a-half long workshop. We can't necessarily expect, especially me, to sit in front of the computer for an hour and a half. So we will have a break after this. But now is the time for any questions that you all have. You can feel free to turn on your audio or write in the chat.
Franny, I have a question. I was delayed because I didn't have the Zoom link, so I missed the first few minutes. So I just what's the mapping of the course? What are we going to be doing the next 3 sessions?
Excellent question. And I'm going to go back and just show. Oh, so here is the workshop plan for today. So today's workshop is focused on the drafting and idea making part of the video. So sort of brainstorming and coming up with your idea, and the recording part of the video. And then next week's workshop will be office hours, in which you can come in, talk about a project you're interested in doing, and ask myself and Michelle very personalized questions. And the week after that is going to be about editing and sharing your video. So then we're going to get more into using different editing softwares and different platforms you can upload your video to as well. So we've kind of broken it down. So having 2 technical workshops and then some time in between for you to ask questions.
Okay.
I have a question about for both Michelle and Martha. For both of your videos, let's say 10 minutes, or I don't know how long it is, or 5 minutes, what percentage of time would you say you need to edit? In other words, if it's a 5-minute video, does it take you 15 minutes, to half an hour, 2 hours to edit? And then how do you know when you're done editing?
All right, let's do the first question first, because the second question is a huge source of existential crisis of when you know you're done editing. But for the first question, how long does it take to edit a video? That's actually going to depend. So if you have spent a lot of time planning out your video and you know exactly what shots you're going to take, or for example, if you have spent a lot of time planning out your podcast and you know exactly what you're going to say and all of the things that you want to put in there, and nothing bad happens and nothing unexpected happens during the recording process, then you may find that the editing process is really easy and really fast, because all you need to do is splice all of your clips together and export it and you're done. But on the other hand, if you have a video or a podcast where you're not quite sure what the end product is going to look like and you're making it up as you go along. So if you're just filming a vlog, so a daily vlog video, record of what you did throughout the day and you don't know what the storyline is, or if you're doing a podcast where you're just recording a conversation between you and a friend, but you don't know what the point of the conversation is, then it's actually going to take you so much longer to edit, because you need to spend time determining what the storyline is going to be, cutting out all the things that you don't want, putting in effects to reduce the impact of all sorts of mishaps that might have happened during the recording process. All of those things So it's actually, yeah, it depends. And what it depends on is how much preparation you've put into it. For your second question, which is when do you know you're done? That, like I said, is a source of existential crisis. I don't know when I'm done, when my manager says, you should stop editing, you need to spend time doing other things. But, you know, it's one of those things where you're never going to be happy. And at some point in time, you need to realize that you can spend, you know, another, you know, 5 hours to make a 2% improvement in the video, or you can acknowledge that there are things that you don't need to do, and the things that you want to do but you don't need to do are just perfectionist aspects that you may choose to pursue, but you also may choose to acknowledge that your time might be better spent elsewhere. Martha, do you want to address those questions too?
I found that doing videos, which I have really prepared well for and can do the shots easily, a 5-minute video, which is kind of what I work with, might take a few hours to edit. The bird videos, another 5-minute thing, easily 20 to 40 hours. And it's like, I can't believe how much time I spent. But that now I've gotten better. So be kind to yourself and realize that if you're learning a new software, you're not only going to have the actual editing, but, you know, just sort of like, where is stuff on the keyboard, that kind of stuff. That's just, it adds extra time. As soon as you feel more comfortable mastering that and knowing how to save things, you know, basic questions, it gets a lot more rewarding. You see your efforts take form a lot quicker. I also agree with Michelle that a deadline can really be very motivating.
I'd like to spend some time on Alan's questions as well. So first one being, are there any other movie editing programs if you do not have Apple? And 2, do podcasts always involve video? So on the second question, no. As Franny said, podcasts do not have video. They're entirely audio, like a radio program. However, you may have encountered some podcasts or even some radio programs on YouTube where they have chosen to show the video as well as the audio aspect of the podcast, because they've decided that, you know, the podcast, the audio only podcast, is a way to reach an audience who only want to listen to something, maybe because they're in the middle of driving and they want to listen to a podcast. But the video version of the podcast is a good way to reach a different kind of audience, someone who wants to get more deeply involved into the conversation and be able to watch the conversationalists and their facial features and their body language expressions. And whether you do a solely audio podcast or a video podcast is up to you and what kind of audience you want to reach. And then for other movie editing programs, as Franny said, yes, there are plenty, and which ones you choose to use, we will go through several different options and explain why you might want to use them, and which ones are easiest to access. But we'll do that later.
Do you usually pre-record podcasts or do it live? Most of the time that they are pre-recorded, so the conversation is recorded. Sometimes there's a little bit of editing. Depends on how much you want to edit the conversation. Some podcasts add music or sound effects as well. And I've even heard podcasts that are more like radio plays that are heavily edited. But most of the time the podcast is pre-recorded and then released onto a platform, or usually multiple platforms. A lot of people listen to podcasts on audio sharing websites like Spotify or SoundCloud. Also, they can be accessed through YouTube, and oftentimes radio stations play podcasts as well. I used to live in Michigan, and I know our NPR station would often play local podcasts.
I've got a question for Martha. Martha, what are your favorite resources for learning how to do all the things that you've learned how to do?
Um, so I do use Reddit. I find that that's reddit.com, that there are very good user groups for each software where, and I try to find a software group, I mean, like DaVinci Resolve for beginners. You know, I try to get something because sometimes you go off in the deep end and then people kind of make fun of you, which is sad. So I try to find a user group where I can ask a question like, hey, how do I do XYZ? And they say, okay, sure, this is how you do it. So um, there are online places, and you know, certainly you could ask us later on if you have something specific that, you know, hey, I'm interested in iMovie, what's the best place for iMovie? We can probably find good places to recommend. Um, you can also find some good websites. I use like nofilmschool.com, which talks about making your movie going from just a point and shoot video to something a bit more exciting. You know, they can talk about different techniques and different um, ways to edit, you know, to get a bit more of a theatrical sense. You know, where's a good source for free, copyright-free music? These places, they're all maybe just 2 or 3 steps in advance of you, and you can really learn a lot of interesting technical questions from places like that.
Great. Seeing as that we've been sitting for 40 minutes, I think it's time to move into our break. So you can feel free to turn off your camera if you have your camera on, go take a stretch or use the bathroom or get a drink if you need. But if you don't feel like you need a break, we have a little optional discussion question. I know that Alan already shared that he likes the moth. But you can also share a video you enjoy watching or a podcast that you enjoy, so we can just sort of get a sense of what each other are interested in. All right.
Thanks for the thumbs up.
Thanks for the thumbs up. So before we get into more technical aspects of video making, I'm going to circle back to sort of the conversation that we had during the break, sort of talking about our favorite podcasts and our favorite videos, because when you're looking for ideas and inspiration, a lot of the time it's great to look at the things that you like listening to or watching and watch them or listen to them, not necessarily just for enjoyment, but with a little bit more focus on the way they tell their stories or the technical details. For instance, I really like watching videos of people painting and drawing on YouTube or Instagram. And I also paint and draw myself. So I started to think, well, what sort of setup are these artists using? How are they getting these above videos of themselves painting and drawing? And so I sort of started to figure out how I could take painting and drawing videos of my own.
I found out a YouTube video on how you can make your own teleprompter, which is pretty cool. So if you ever find yourself having to read a script a lot and you want to make eye contact, for about $10, you can make one if you use an iPhone. So that's fun. It's nice to learn more things. Yeah.
So now we're going to be talking about the planning stage of the project, which in lingo that's sort of used by professional video editors or in the movie or audio industry, this is called pre-production stage. And so when you're brainstorming your ideas, it's also really good to consider your tools, because your tools are sort of the constraints with which you can work in. So sort of thinking, for instance, am I gonna film on my phone or record with my phone? Because then you sort of understand what apps you might have to use or are able to look into that, and also sort of understand what the constraints of your setup are as well. And then you can start thinking about making a plan. So you can use all sorts of planning tools like a script or a storyboard, which I'll talk a little bit more about. We'll also see what planning tool Michelle used to plan her video. So the brainstorming stage, it's really good to think about the media that you enjoy to sort of get your ideas as well. So that's how it all ties together. So this is an example of a storyboard. It's for the movie Parasite, which I believe won the Academy Award last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, last year. And I really love this director. He basically drew out the entire movie before they filmed it in a lot of detail. So a lot of the detail in his drawings didn't necessarily get into the final movie, but he really was able to sit down with a pen and paper and draw out what he thought the movie would look like and how to tell the story. He's a great artist. You don't necessarily need to have art skills if you want to use a storyboard. You can make them using stick figures, and it's sort of thinking about how your characters or subject will take up space. This is another example of a planning tool. And this is sort of breaking it down into more of a chart. You could draw something like this out or use it for Microsoft Excel. I really like this sort of tool when I'm thinking about making something with audio, especially if it's a podcast, because with a podcast, you don't necessarily know how the conversation's really going to go. So with something like this, it might be great to think, okay, so for the first 10 minutes, we're going to have a conversation about the Great Lakes. And maybe after that, we're going to talk about pollution. And it might be a good way to sort of structure and have an idea of something before you do it. But also these can be used for visual mediums like video. And this is good if you're someone who you're not necessarily visual enough that you would want to draw a storyboard. Maybe you kind of want to describe what you're going to do in words. And you don't even necessarily have to make a chart. This could also just sort of be more of a document with sentences. Like this, which is what Michelle used for her rock hunt video. Do you want to talk more about this?
Yeah. So with this video, I knew that there were several things that I needed to have in place. So I knew that my audience was going to be younger kids. And so when I think about what I'm going to say, it needs to be pitched at that level. I can't, if I'm going to use big words, I need to explain it. So I decided the best thing to do is to write out a script. And that will help me think through what I'm going to say, and also help me think through whether or not the words I'm saying are pitched at the right level. What I've also done is thought about the different shots that I need to take. So I know that I want a shot where you can see me and you can see everything that I'm doing as well. But I also want a close-up shot so that you can see, all the tiny little details of what I'm doing, like mixing together sugar and water and what that really looks like when they're mixed together. And then I also know that because it takes a long time to grow a sugar crystal, I can't get it done within my one afternoon of filming that video. And it's going to take me the entire week. I'm going to want to get shots, clips of of later on in the process, what it looks like that I can splice into the video. So at the very top, you can see that I've got my list out of the visual aspect of things. So I've got my camera A, camera B aspects, which means that for me, I know that in order to plan out the recording of this video, I need to source 2 cameras. So for me, because I was using a phone to shoot it with, I used my own camera, and then I borrowed my husband's camera as well. Sorry, when I say camera, I used my own phone. And then I borrowed my husband's phone while he was sleeping and used that as well. And then for B-roll shots, which are other alternate shots, I didn't really need to borrow a phone, but I did need to make sure that I filmed those and I had them prepared for when I was editing. The script is in a way the audio aspect of the video. And what we will talk about later is in recording tips and tricks, which is the production aspect, is how I considered like the different sound sources and what I did to make sure that the sound quality was good. But in this preparation aspect, what's not written down But what is implied in here is all of the resources that I need to collect, like all of the technology that I need to have in place to be able to film this video. But I would not be able to do any of that planning if I didn't write it down and really think through all of the steps one by one of what I need to do. So in a different example, I recorded a podcast for a state department in Australia. This is an internal podcast, so unfortunately I can't share it with you. But because it was in a corporate environment, the planning process for that was a little bit different. So I wrote down my plan and in a way that I could share with my manager of to do it and what the resources I needed were and how much they would cost so that he could sign off in it and say, yes, you are allowed to do that. And then in the process of it, in the planning, I had a document where I listed out all of the questions that I wanted to ask. So the podcast was an interview between me and one other person. So I had a document that I listed out all the questions that I wanted to ask her, and I shared it with the person I was interviewing as well. And then I had an email with the person I was interviewing explaining out the outcome of the podcast. So what is the message that we want to share through the podcast so that when we are talking, everything focuses on the message. And in terms of preparing for recording, I made sure to ask around the organization to see if there was a microphone that I could borrow. And so I was able to borrow a professional podcast microphone and several microphones plus a recorder that plugged into the microphone. This meant that I had really good quality audio and I didn't need to do too much to edit the audio to make it better. However, in other times when I haven't had access to a professional microphone, I have just used my smartphone to do it with. And later we'll talk about ways to improve the audio that is recorded by your smartphone so that it still sounds professional quality, but with only a very old phone.
Yeah, when it comes to recording audio, I find that you can still get good quality audio when you're using something like a phone, the recorder that's on a phone, but you just need to be a little bit more intentional about your setup to make sure that you avoid unnecessary noise, which you might not necessarily have to do if you're using a professional microphone or a separate microphone, but you can get great audio from a phone. So here we are going more into sort of tips about recording. So we kind of have gone a little bit into this, but recording on your cell phone versus a computer versus a standalone camera. I've said recording here, but I meant sort of taking both audio and video. And so you kind of have to plan for the device that you have ahead of time. But you don't necessarily, if you're starting out, have to get a standalone camera or microphone. I think that using a phone or computer, if you have one, is a good way of getting a sense of if you like this or as a hobby or as part of your work before you invest money into expensive equipment. So just as we talked about, using sort of careful thinking in your setup before you start recording, which saves you time in the editing stage because you don't have to edit out little mistakes that happen. You know, the finger accidentally in your video or the lighting that is making people look very washed out. So if you prepare ahead of time, thinking about things that could go wrong, you can save time in the editing stage later on. So managing background noise, maybe telling the people in your home that you're recording, or knowing what time of day is quietest where you live. So maybe not when people have construction or lawnmowers going on. Having a good lighting setup, which doesn't necessarily mean having professional lighting, but sort of understanding the lighting in your house. For instance, not taking a video of yourself in front of a window because the bright light behind you is gonna make you look really washed out, or not washed out, it's gonna make you look hard to see and dark in comparison to the bright light behind you, because the camera is not really sure how to interpret you when you're next to such a bright light. So that is called backlit, which can happen when you're recording in a really bright space. Another thing you can do is rehearsing your video or podcast, which is just great so that you don't have to do a lot of takes or edit out your mistakes. And doing a test shot or recording is a great way of realizing, oh, you can see something in the video that I didn't realize, or you can hear the sound of my washing machine and I didn't realize. So that's a great way of catching little things ahead of time. And doing multiple recordings of the same thing is also really great because it gives you options when you're editing later on. So sort of preparing during your recording stage to be nicer to yourself, your editing self in the future. Do you want to add anything, Michelle or Martha?
Yes, I guess I'll share what I did with the video. I filmed the video in my kitchen, which has horrendous lighting. It's just an overhead light that's not very bright. So I had to bring in several lamps into the kitchen and set them up behind my phone, which was recording, in order to make sure that the light was brighter. That means that the quality of the image that the phone records will be much sharper. If you do not have enough lighting, then it will be hard to see. And it's possible to increase the exposure in the video in the editing process. But as you do that, you will also see that the graininess of the video increases. And that's because without enough light, the camera can't collect all the information that it needs to create a good quality image. I definitely rehearsed my video and I did multiple shots because even though I had a script and I was reading out from the script, I tripped up quite a bit. So multiple shots did help. And in terms of managing background noise, I filmed this entire video in the morning before my husband woke up, which meant that one, I could borrow his phone for my second shot, but also two, I didn't have any of his noise banging around the house in the video, and that meant that I wouldn't have to edit that out of the video.
I'd like to add that one of the differences between taking photos and videos is that with a video, you want to step back maybe a foot or two, because sometimes your camera might not be shooting in the same aspect range. You know, it might be a little taller than wider than your video would want to be. So if you back up just a little bit, you can zoom in more when you're actually doing the editing. It just gives you a little bit more flexibility.
Thank you for those tips. I definitely will use the one about backing up your video because I sometimes tend to get things too close up. So here is a little section specifically about tips for audio, which is really great if you are making something like a podcast that is entirely focused on audio. So recording a minute of silence to capture the ambient noise of the room you're in. So this in filmmaking is called room noise. And sometimes it's good to get just the sound of your room without anything happening in it. Because if you think about it, even when nobody's speaking, there is still a noise happening, whether it's a refrigerator or an air conditioner, just sort of the buzz of the room. And you'll need that because if you're editing your audio and you want to take out a word or a noise, you can use your ambient room noise to fill in the empty space. So that can be really useful. Testing your audio levels. So making sure that you're not recording too quietly or too loud. There's a little wiggle room. Sometimes if you record too quietly, you can bring it up later when you're editing. But if you get really too loud, sometimes the audio will get very distorted and it's hard to get back the detail in your audio if it really goes over the levels. I've used a little bit of technical language, which you can sometimes see in editing and recording devices, that you can see how many decibels you're speaking at. And so you kind of want to keep the audio for your video between -24 decibels and -10 decibels. And placing the microphone as close to you as possible helps increase the volume and sound quality. You kind of want to make sure you're not getting too close to yourself, that it's not too loud. But for instance, in Michelle's rock candy video, she had a microphone right on the counter with her, I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, but I believe that was a way of you getting close-up audio from your speaking voice. And if somebody you live with is willing to lend you their phone, it can be good to have a second device just taking audio in a location near the person who's speaking. So that is more of a video tip. And it can also be good for audio because audio can sound different depending on where the recording device is relative to you. You might find that if you're taking a shot of yourself from the side, the camera might not necessarily get the right audio for you, but a different device that's closer to you might have picked up what you were saying in a clearer way. So like Michelle borrowed her husband's phone, sometimes if you can figure out a way to get that second device, it can be helpful in getting you some extra things to work with while you are editing later on.
Do we have pop filters on the next slide?
Yeah, I think so. A pop filter, I don't think it's explicitly in the slides, but a pop filter is something that would be useful if you're recording a lot of audio, which is a sort of mesh which you can put over the microphone, and it helps soften the hard consonants that you say, like P's and D's. You can buy a pop filter, but they're also pretty easy to make. If you have like an old pair of old mesh, like an old pair of tights or pantyhose, and you put them over a wire hanger, you can also make a pop filter. You can also, this is great if you're recording outside, but putting some sort of cover on your microphone can help it avoid picking up the sound of wind. So that might be something that me and Michelle have tried, which is very DIY, putting a sock on your phone, as Michelle is demonstrating. I find that if you roll up the sock a little bit and put it on that recording end, it can sort of help soften those hard consonants or get rid of those, the sound of wind or something like that. And also sometimes making sure your environment has lots of sound absorption can reduce echo. So maybe not necessarily recording in the room in your house that, like your garage, for instance, where it has a lot of smooth walls with nothing on it. Maybe somewhere, even a closet can be good because you have a lot of fabric around you to help like reduce the echoing noise. So that's also something to consider. And this is more for editing, the last tip. It's sort of marking an area when you're recording so that you know to look for it when you're editing. So Michelle does that with a clap sometimes. And some apps also allow you to leave a little marker while you're recording if you're using a specific recording app.
So the reason why we do this is because sometimes when you record a podcast, you might end up with hours and hours of audio files that you need to sort through later on and try and find, okay, I know my friend said something really, really important in this spot, but I don't remember where it is. Whereas if you're recording the video or the audio, the moment you hear your friend say that really, really important thing, you can just do a clap, and that will turn up in the editing program as a spike in the sound levels. And then you can know that is where, straight after that bit that I really want to put into my podcast. But the other reason why you might want to do that is if you are recording a video, and if your video, the audio and the sound are coming from two separate devices. So in my Rock Candy video, the video aspect of it came from a phone that was set further back. But because it was set further back, it didn't record my voice very well. So I wanted to take the sound from the camera that was on the table that recorded my voice a bit better. But I needed to align the two so that it didn't look like my mouth was moving and the sound was doing something completely different. And so if I do a clap, I can see myself, well, I can see this spike in the clap in both the video that comes from the first phone and also the spike in the audio from the video that comes from the second phone. And then I can align the two and make sure that they are the sound and the videos in both videos and the sound in both videos are happening at the same time. And going back to the first tip of trying out different microphone options, I really want to emphasize this, especially if you are doing podcasts. Try out the different aspects of your phone before you try buying a microphone. You can do this with either the generic video on your phone or the note-taking app, where you can record voice memos to yourself. Those are good options. Try out talking into your phone with your phone close to your mouth, then try it again with your phone further away. Try it again with your earbuds plugged in and speaking into the microphone in your earbuds, and then try it again with a sock on your phone and a sock on your earbuds, and just listen to them and think about which ones do you prefer. Like, do you like it? Do you like the sound that comes out of the microphone on your phone, or do you like the sound that comes out of the microphone on your earbuds better? Have a listen and make a decision from there, and then you know what you want to do in the future when you're recording the podcast.
Thanks, Michelle. I just want to clarify, when Michelle talks about seeing the spike from the clap, that's because in a lot of video and audio editing programs, you actually get to see the sound waves, like a visual representation of the sound waves of what you've recorded. So that's why you will see a spike from a loud noise. So here are some tips from videos. So here we're talking about putting the camera somewhere solid to reduce shakiness. This is good, especially if you don't have a cameraman. And even if a person is filming, there can be some shaking naturally from your hands. You don't necessarily need to have a tripod, although they are good. There are also ways where you could sometimes when I record, I might rest my phone against a can to get the right angle on myself, or put it on a stack of books so that it's a little bit higher up. You can be really creative with things that you have around the house if you don't necessarily have a tripod to help yourself get a stabilized camera. We also have a link to making a DIY phone stand. It's really easy to, if you have some cardboard, make yourself a little stand to put your phone on. Did you have one to show, Michelle? I didn't know if you grabbed one. Oh, this is a tripod that we have for work. They were given to the experiential learning specialists because we have to do video for some of the aspects of our job. And it has been pretty helpful. You can get a pretty low cost tripod, but you can also DIY your setup as well. So we talked a little bit earlier about lighting. So somewhere well lit with even lighting, doing something like early in the morning outside or in the evening during sunset, there's a lot of shadows. So that might be something you want to avoid. And like I mentioned earlier, avoiding having a lot of lighting from behind. Actually, there's an example of backlighting in my video. If you look at my video on the screen, I'm in a yellow room and the only lighting in here is from my ceiling lamp. And so compared to my bright background, it might be harder to see my facial features because there's this bright light behind me. You might want to test out different angles for filming your video. We've got this example of a picker-upper video that I made for the Boob Box, where I was constructing a toy for kids to follow along at home. And I got a very close image, like a close image of my hands putting things together. And another thing is to make sure that your camera is focused on the subject. We have a little bit more about this in the resource guide, but you can just sort of, if you're filming video on your phone, for instance, make sure that you use the focusing tool in your app. So I know in my phone app, I have to do a little tap on the area where I want to focus, and it can vary depending on what app you're using to shoot. So it's good to have a sort of familiarity with that before you film, because you want to make sure that the focal area is clear in your video. So we just went through a lot of tips very quickly and a lot of technical information. So if anything is confusing, we will have time for questions. And also it would be really great if you brought your questions with you to office hours as well, because we will have plenty of time to go over things next week if something's confusing, or if you want to talk about a specific aspect of something at home for you, like you might have a weird lighting situation you're trying to solve, or a phone device that you're not really sure how to use. So we can help out with that.
So before I get stuck into the goals and asking you about your own goals, I just want to call out the resource guide that Franny mentioned, because learning how to create a video and a podcast is a journey, and it's not something that we can completely cover appropriately within 3 weeks. And so we want to share with you resources that you can use to really dive deeply into different aspects of video and podcast production. And so we've put together a resource guide, which either has been shared with you or will be shared with you via email. And in that guide, it will include links to various videos or websites that you can click on to learn more about how to plan out a project, or how to record a video with your phone, depending on what kind of phone you have. And it will also go into editing, which we'll cover in 2 weeks' time as well. The resource guide also provides a bit of a short overview of different kinds of vocabulary that you might encounter when reading about production, because the video and podcast industry does use a lot of jargon and a lot of words that don't necessarily make sense if you're coming into it from scratch. So hopefully the resource guide will explain all of these words and give you further links that you can explore to learn more about the different things that we've talked about, and also to remind you about the tips and tricks that we've talked about in the last couple of slides. And so let's go on to participant goals. So this is now about you, from what you've been thinking about over the last, when you were registering for this program and over the last hour or so. What goals do you have for your video or podcast project that you'd like to make? So this is actually going to help us over the next weeks as well, to make sure that we are giving you the skills that you need to create the projects that you want to make. And feel free to unmute yourself and let us know over voice or share it in the chat box.
Hi, Michelle. This is Evelyn Lee. Thank you so much. This particular computer doesn't have video, so I apologize. I can't join with video. But what I hope to do ultimately is kind of like record video, like interview podcasts and video. So that's what's on my mind, is having other people that I'm maybe video, like meeting either via Zoom or something else.
So that's actually pretty cool because, you know, like we're recording this Zoom video conference and we're going to make that into a movie. So that's kind of the workflow that we're going to be making of this. So Evelyn, I think that's a really manageable project.
Okay, thank you. I'll mention one other project maybe. I might consider like audio, like book recording as well.
That's one of those projects where the perfect place to be is in the closet, because you can do all sorts of voices, but also get the best quality audio. So someone mentioned at the beginning that they were interested in doing podcast interviews about conflict management. Sounds actually quite interesting.
Yeah, sorry, that was me. Yeah, I'm an adjunct professor and where I teach conflict management, and I just I don't know, I'm not really sure that I've clearly defined what I want to do with it, but I just thought that maybe I could use some videos to teach my students about conflict resolution, and just as another teaching tool. But I didn't. Yeah, so I'm just trying to learn how to do it.
And apps for simple animations. Franny, do you know much about that?
Oh yes, animation is something I'm very excited about. So we might not necessarily have time to get as in depth as I'd like to today, but there are some really great apps depending on whether you're using a phone or a larger device. But one that I like is called Rough Animator. And there's also something I believe called Flip-a-Clip. And those are more like traditional kind of like flipbook animation. And then there's one that I really like that's kind of a more abstract or unusual approach called Loom. But both Rough Animator and Flip-a-Clip, I believe, are free. So those are good to start by checking out with them. I'll write the names in the chat. And that's more for hand-drawn animation. If you're looking to, there are also apps that rely less on drawing. So that's also an option too.
So we've got about 8 minutes left. Feel free to continue sharing your goals and ideas for your own project in the chat. But let's talk about what we can possibly do together over the next week or 2 weeks in the next slide. And I was going to call it homework, but it's not as stressful as homework because it's fun. So what I'd like you to do is, if you have a project in mind, start planning it out. Think about what you want the outcome to be, who you want to watch it, or who you want to listen to it. What information do you want to be transferred in your video or your podcast? What kind of things do you need to have? What are your resources that you use to help you in creating that project? And then also experiment with different recording options. So if you have a phone, try out different ways of using your phone to film different things. So for me, sometimes I just go out and film squirrels. We don't have possums in America, only opossums, just squirrels. Sometimes I go out and film squirrels just to see what kind of sound I get from that and what kind of visual recording and what quality it's like. And then film different kinds of things. Film during different times of the day. Film with different things propping up your phone in different backgrounds. just so you get a good sense of how your camera works or how your microphone works. And that's going to get you in a place where you feel more comfortable and more prepared to use your camera or your microphone when you are actually at a place where you need to record your final product. That's the homework. That's not really homework.
Yeah, and you can bring your questions, observations, your ideas to office hours next week. Feel free to drop in whenever you are able to between 4:30 and 6. You don't need to attend the entire time. If you need to make dinner at that time or something, feel free to, pop in and say hi. But you can also stay the entire time and hear about each other's projects if you're interested in that. If you can't make it to office hours, you can also contact me or Michelle, or even CC both of us over email if you have any questions to ask us in the meantime.
And something that we've added in the resource guide is also some information on how you can contact the library to schedule a one-on-one with Martha or anyone else working in the information services team to learn about a new thing one-on-one. So that can include video making, but also anything else that you might want to learn about. That's an option as well. Next week is office hours, but the week after that is when we'll be talking about editing and sharing your project. So that's the post-production aspect. And because you've all mentioned that you're comfortable with using a phone, we will probably demonstrate using Adobe Rush on the phone, which is an app that you can use to edit videos on the phone. Got a question which is asked, one-on-one is remote only, correct? And yes, for now it is remote only for everyone's safety. Yeah, and the one-on-ones are also a good option in the future, even after the workshop, that will still be available. And I put the dates for the next 2 workshops in the chat. So December 8th will be office hours. And then December 15th, so that is 2 Tuesdays from today, will be the next workshop. And that's at the same time from 4:30 to 6 p.m. And there's 2 minutes for questions. Yeah, questions, comments.
I'm sorry, I joined just as you talked about teleprompters. Let me tell you, I've needed them this whole time, this COVID time. What did you, I apologize for asking you to repeat what you said, but maybe like a quick tip or a suggestion for teleprompter?
And you're not the first to ask about that. I'm sorry. It's just I'll send the link to Michelle and Franny so that they can include it. I found a YouTube how to make a teleprompter using foam core, which you can get for $1 or $2 from Walmart, and a 5x6 piece of glass from a photo frame. And then you put your iPhone or whatever your phone is that has the ability to display something. And there is some software that you can get on a trial basis for free, or you can pay $10, I think, if you want to purchase a different version. And it does the teleprompter thing. So you mount it right in front of your camera, you shoot through the glass, and it reflects up the writing onto the glass. So it looks like you're actually making eye contact with the camera, and it's pretty helpful. So I'll send that to when they send out the information.
Okay, thank you so much.
And to be honest, because I'm lazy, what I did was I printed out my script in extra big font and stuck it, like sticky taped it to my camera. And so it does mean that in the actual video, you can see my eyeballs going off in different directions. But it's one of those things where I could be perfectionist and make a teleprompter, or I could be lazy and sticky tape my script to the camera. And I chose to do the lazy version.
And I wouldn't have known that that was the case, Michelle, unless since you just told me, now I know. But I didn't pick up on that at all.
Now you know, so you'll never unsee it. But if anyone has more questions, we're going to be around next week from 4:30 to 6 at the same time, same place. And that will be a great opportunity to bring specific questions that you have for more personalized support.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Are we using the same link for the next 2 sessions, or are you going to be emailing us another link to join?
Sorry, you mean the Zoom link?
Yeah, is it going to be the Zoom link, or is it going to be a different one in the future?
It'll get emailed to you the day of.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Yeah.
All right, thank you everyone for coming. We're really excited to see that so many people are interested in making videos and podcasts. And we'll see you either next week or the week after.